Hello and welcome to Comic Cuts, the panel show. I'm Kev F. Sutherland, the bloke who writes and draws comics for Beano and Marvel and now adapts Shakespeare into graphic novels for kids, and also has a hand in the Scottish falsetto sock puppet theatre. This is your favourite podcast, which has an occasionally remote connection to comics. Don't worry if you don't know or care anything about comics. Half the time, neither do any of my guests, and it doesn't hurt. My guests have brought with them a panel from a comic or something close, and we're going to see if we can identify it and talk about it. Maybe we and you will learn something about comics we didn't already know, or maybe we'll just show off a bit and have an enjoyable chat. Let's see. Joining me today from the world of comedy, we have Scott Agnew and Mitch Benn. Comic Cuts. We're looking at a panel, and we comprise a panel. There's a few of us, so the panel sees a panel, and we talk about the comics from the panel we discuss, and we call it Comic Cuts. I've asked everyone on the panel to bring in a panel to the panel. You can see these images on the show page and on the artwork for the podcast episode, depending where you get your podcast from. If you can't see it, say you're driving or some such thing, don't worry, because we're going to describe them. But first, let's describe ourselves. If you don't know my two guests, well, what's wrong with you? You should. Scott, you are most recently known to the radio listeners from Dead Man Walking. Oh, no, Dead Man Talking. There you go.
Talking, yes.
Got it wrong already. Which sort of describes what it says on the tin, but could you give them a bit more detail of what you mean by that?
I'm officially better than Jesus. I've come back from the dead 3 times. I caught COVID. I self-isolated for 10 days. My first day out of my self-isolation, I had a bit of a sore chest. Sat down, had a fag, so I thought, that'll help it.
Aid for you right there.
Yeah, it turned out I was having a massive heart attack, and I died 3 times in the back of the ambulance between my local hospital and the Golden Jubilee, which is the best hospital, because apparently if you're going to have a heart attack, the place to do it is in Glasgow, because that's where the world trains, because we have more heart attacks than anywhere else. And here I am 5 years later, do you know what I mean? Christ, I might actually live to normal Glaswegian age now,
As long as you make it to the end of the podcast, that's going to be good enough for me. And Mitch, we are always delighted to see you, but from the Radio 4 listeners' point of view, and I hate to bring it all back to Radio 4, we're not on Radio 4, but
neither am I.
for a while,
for nearly 10 years now, and nobody's noticed.
Well, for a while you disappeared, and then when the show that had ridiculously dispensed with you, they had you back for their final episode because it turned out they couldn't survive without you.
It was not quite the final episode.
We're talking about the Now Show.
The Now Show, which it ran from 98 until about 2 years ago, and I was on it from 99 until 2016, which in retrospect is far too long, and I should have quit after about 10 years, because I think basically I probably screwed up my own career by sticking with that show as long as I did, because I'm sure there were opportunities that came and went that I couldn't do anything with because I was signed up to be on that thing forever, and also, I'm not honestly that surprised they got rid of me when they did, because the sheer relentlessness of having to produce material to a decent standard that often, that frequently, and with that little notice, because of course the topical show you have to kind of leave. It's I'm a terrible one for leaving things to the last minute anyway, but when you do topical stuff you kind of have to leave it to the last minute because events. They had a final run and they got us all back for one. So I was on one of them. Marcus was on one. John Holmes is on one. Everybody from what I like to call the rumours lineup of the Now Show. I love the fact that I don't have to explain that.
We're of a certain vintage. That's what
the rumours, not the original, but possibly the definitive. Anyway, but
I'm going to say, Scott, that you're not a stranger to topical comedy. Of course, you do Breaking the News.
But my background, I was a journalist before I was a stand-up. So news I've always been a kind of news junkie anyhow. I actually can't believe myself now, which says a lot about how thoroughly miserable the world in the news cycle is that I can barely bring myself to watch a news programme anymore.
They're talking about doing, well, I believe they are doing Saturday Night Live over here.
Well, I mean, there was because I remember that was a conversation that we were always having in the sort of the 90s and noughties. You know, why can't you do the Daily Show here? Why is it impossible to do that? And there were attempts. You know, Marcus did a thing called the Late Edition, which didn't really take in sort of the early noughties.
Yeah.
Part of the problem used to be you could possibly do it more easily now, and not for good reasons. Part of the problem used to be that there's an inversion again between America and Britain, between the way their news media works and the way our news media used to work, which was that their print journalism was all very sober and responsible, whereas their TV news was just spittle-flecked invective. You know what I mean? And ridiculously and proudly biased. Whereas our TV news, until about 5 years ago, was, you know, quite, you know, sober, reflective, and even the ones that, you know, were part of a, you know, and again, this is why I know I used to bang the drum a lot for the BBC. I bang it somewhat less enthusiastically these days because, in particular, their current affairs has gone horribly, horribly sort of polluted with kind of Tory cronyism, and you know, which is a discussion being had at length elsewhere. We need not trouble these good listeners with it. But I think the mere presence of the BBC in our news marketplace kept our TV news fairly sober and responsible, because they'd always have that to be judged against. Whereas, famously, our press, our print media, is again spittle-flecked invective and openly proudly biased. And the thing is, what that meant was, if you actually used to watch The Daily Show, particularly when it was at the absolute height of its powers in the first Jon Stewart era, most of what they did, it wasn't so much about the events, it was about the coverage of the events, and that was what Jon Stewart had that we never had, which is Fox News shoveling material at him on an hourly basis.
Do you know what? Talking of changing the subject, we're here to talk about...
A show to do, kids.
We're here to talk about a very old medium, the medium of comics. You've brought in a panel each. We're going to have a look at those. We're going to guess what they're from, and then we'll see where that takes us. And Scott, I'd like to look at the one you've brought in first. Listeners at home, you should find this on the show page. You should find it on the holding image for wherever you get your podcasts. But don't worry about that, because we're going to describe it. Scott, it's your image. So, Mitch, can you describe what you see before you?
What I'm seeing is a man who appears to be wearing either a policeman or possibly more security guard's uniform. He's wearing like a sort of short-sleeve blue pilot shirt, but with kind of epaulets and some kind of Sam Brown belt, which makes it look very much like a sort of a military uniform. But it looks like either a sort of, you know, a summer weight American cop's uniform, or more possibly a security guard uniform. He is a big burly chap. He's got a kind of flat top crew cut and a little 90s beard, which suggests to me that we could be looking at something 90s here, purely on the basis of the facial hair. And he is standing in what all we can see of the room is there is a shelf of books behind him. There is what looks like an open hatch in the ceiling. I have no idea what's going on up there. And he is angrily brandishing a huge red book in a manner suggestive that he's about to smash you in the face with it. And the book it's one of those huge ones with like a gold clasp holding it shut like a sort of a medieval Bible. But legibly on the cover of this book, it is called Haunting Memories of My Favorite Cemeteries. And that's the American spelling of favorite and cemetery. So we're in North America somewhere. And the big guy, as he's about to smash you in the face of that book, is saying in a joint speech bubble, "I'm going to throw the book at you. Hey, what's this?" So evidently he has been interrupted in his book slamming pursuits by some unforeseen circumstance which we haven't got to see yet.
And from my guesswork, based on looking at the line work and the drawing style, the colouring is old-fashioned, almost as if it's been done with watercolor rather
Yeah.
than later computer artwork. The line art has an inking style. Again, you're right. I'd nail that to the 90s or the late 80s. And Scott, you shared us a whole page. I've zoomed in on that one image, but I'm now going to zoom out and have a look at the whole page that you shared, which I think will give us a little bit more information. We're now looking at the whole page of comic strip. The panel we just looked up in close with the guy waving the book over his head is the third of 4 panels on this comic strip page. And I now think I start to recognize the drawing style. Mitch, do you?
There's an interesting effect in the top panel of suggesting incredibly rapid movement, that we now see that security guard guy is fighting a guy who's wearing what looks for all the world like a WWE wrestling costume.
Yeah.
He has just thrown him on his head. But we see like transparent images of 2 previous stages of this battle, which is quite a nice, there's the comic books techniques for depicting action, be it with sort of manga lines or sort of they started to add fake digital blur in the noughties, didn't they?
Yeah.
To sort of action as well. But what they've done here is quite nice.
I think the coloring puts it in the 1980s before they had started using Photoshop on everything. I think the line drawing suggests that it's been drawn by Steve Ditko, the artist who created Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. And this is some of his later artwork from the 1980s. And something that Mitch said that I hadn't even thought of. I thought this is just some security guard guy, and this is some guy in a black outfit I've never seen. I think you've nailed it with the wrestling costumes. I think this is some sort of wrestling comic, and those are both wrestler characters, which is why in the picture we first looked at with the close-up of the guy waving the Haunting Memories of Favorite Cemeteries big red book, it's a quite realistic rendition of his face that's been redrawn by someone, probably not Steve Ditko himself, to look like this guy because he's a real guy. Mitch, do you want to have more of a guess before Scott tells us?
No, I'm just wondering where the wrestler guy's left leg has gone in that bottom panel.
Yes, it's disappeared. That's a real cock up. The guy standing full on the ground, his leg goes from his pants down to his thigh.
Behind the other guy's leg and then doesn't re-emerge from behind.
Brilliant.
Well, yeah.
Scott, tell us.
Well, your detective work is pretty much bang on. This is from WWF Battlemania series of comic books, and you're not far out. I believe this was a 1991 production. I don't think there was an awful lot of them because I only ever remember having had one of these comics, because I think they were relatively difficult to get over here. I don't think there was. I don't think they were. I remember getting one of them and never being able to get the the other ones that were associated with it. But yes, the two that is 2 wrestlers. The guy in the cop's outfit is the Big Boss Man, and the other one is the legendary Undertaker. So the Undertaker, that was this was he'd only just appeared in the WWF in about 1990, and this is when he played essentially a dead man who couldn't be hurt, couldn't be So they were all very, very cartoonish, and the Big Boss Man was a correctional facilities guard who strangely was kind of dressed up like a cop from Cobb County, Georgia. And yes, and I have to say that the artist has been very generous to him, because he was a fat man, this is quite a muscular kind of.
If my experience of licensed comics is anything to go by, the person who's being drawn had a say in that. I worked for a while, when I was working for Marvel, I worked on Star Trek. We were drawing classic Star Trek with Nimoy and Shatner in, but I knew the guys who were doing the Star Trek The Next Generation. And
Yeah.
Jean-Luc Picard, or Patrick Stewart,
Yes.
famously contacted them through Marvel Comics and Universal Studios or Paramount and asked if he could be made to look less bald. So this guy asking for a few pounds to be trimmed off, not unusual.
Not unusual. Well, this is knowing the WWF at this time, because it was Vince McMahon who was the master and commander of that world, and let's just say in recent court filings, it turns out he's got a bit of a thing for his men being muscular. So it's likely Vince McMahon, as the owner of WWF, probably would have asked for that rather than necessarily the performer themselves.
Was Trump involved in this wrestling world at this time?
Yes, he would have been. Trump, because WrestleMania 4 and 5 were at the Trump Plaza in Atlantic City. So Trump and McMahon have been involved since the sort of mid-80s. And then later, I think it was WrestleMania 20, there was the Battle of the Billionaires, where McMahon and Trump picked, interestingly, two ethnic minority wrestlers to fight one another as their proxies, right? And the loser would get their head shaved. So obviously it was McMahon that his wrestler lost, and McMahon had his head shaved. But that's also if you've seen the meme where Donald Trump clotheslines a guy beside a wrestling ring. But this is why there's lots to be suspect about the Trump movement and the MAGA movement being very, very much influenced by what happens and how wrestling portrays itself, the idea of kayfabe, things that are possibly real but not real, and it just always playing with that idea of reality, and also the call and response stuff. Those having 3-line slogans that people can chant backwards and forwards. How to get people booing for someone. It's all straight out of WWE.
So wait, the playbook for modern politics is from wrestling?
Me and a few other, I'm not the first person who've had that theory. A few folk have had that kind of theory. Even down to the notion that some people say, and I'm going to use a Trumpism, some people say that him being shot in the ear was staged, it was false,
Get out of here.
and it's for wrestlers that are trying to simulate, having been cut open, they would blade in the ring. They would take a little razor that they kept concealed somewhere on their person, and some would say that what happened to Donald Trump's ear kind of looks like a pro wrestling blading.
Remember where you heard it first.
An extraordinarily perceptive and not in the least bit comforting insight, Scott. Thank you.
I know.
You're saying this is 1991. You're just reminding me of the comic that I did in 1992. I watched, it was a TV show I wouldn't have been watching myself, but I watched it with some cousins, and I saw for the first time Gladiators. And I thought they would make superheroes. So I did it. Somewhere on the shelves behind me is Gladiators comic. I went to LWT. I had a publisher who I'd been working with. I brought them along. We went to LWT. We got the license to turn Gladiators into a superhero comic. So all the Gladiators were given superhero powers. Their pugil sticks were, lightning would have lightning coming out of it. The atmospheres, they would fly round in these atmospheres. We commissioned the artwork for 3 full issues and a little bit more. They published 2, then realised they were losing tons and tons of money, so stopped it. I lost a fortune, and well, a small fortune, but certainly I lost my income really badly at the time. And yes, we didn't publish any more of those comics. But yeah, at the time, what a great idea.
Maybe the fact I'm a homosexual, there was something that appealed to me about muscular men and speedos and baby oil and lycra. I don't know, but I certainly I connected with it at 12 years of age anyhow. And it wasn't until later on in life I realised I loved, if you remember the Thundercats cartoon.
Yeah.
I adored the Thundercats cartoon Mask, which was a kind of
Yes.
I loved Mask, and I remember having spin-off comic books of those cartoons, and then I realised they weren't sort of based from anyone's imagination. It was just Hasbro or whoever the toy manufacturer was kind of went, we need a big series of toys, and they needed a cartoon to sell the toys as opposed to the cartoon. The toys were a spin-off from the cartoon. And I remember these, like the Battlemania comic, feeling dead exotic because it had a door sign in the front, and I was, which would have been unusual. And I thought, oh, nobody else will have had this because it's been flown in, especially from America for me.
Well, how fantastically exotic. That was WrestleMania, the spin-off comic drawn, as far as we can tell, by Steve Ditko, of whom I assume, Scott, you know little and care less.
No, I have. I rather embarrassingly found myself in a pub. I was doing a gig in Money Hive, and the Dumfries Borders direction. Yeah,
I think I know where you're going.
And I can remember the night. Tyson Fury was fighting Klitschko, and it was on the TV. We're all kind of crowded. We were doing a gig in the next room in this, I think it was at Glendara Hotel. That might be taking the high road, but anyway. And I get chatting to this nice man, and somebody kind of went, "You do know who he is, don't you?" And I went, "No idea." That's well, I think it was Alan Grant. Then it was because I was told that's the guy that does Judge Dredd, and so I was sort of, oh right, because I briefly flirted with Judge Dredd in my kind of later teens, but never quite got on board, unfortunately. But
well, we're going to have a look now at what Mitch has brought in. Mitch, I've zoomed in on a small bit of the panel you brought with us.
I can't be niche and culty, but
well, let's have a look at the zoom in before we pull back. And listeners at home, you'll be able to see this on the show notes and blah blah blah. Scott, tell us what you see.
This looks quite dark, quite demonic. It's black and white. It looks like a kind of almost like an ink print. Do you know a screen print? I think. I'm trying to say now. There's sort of what looks like. Yes, it kind of looks like a head, but with possibly a fin or a scale where an ear would be. Is this right? But
Yeah.
it looks as if there's been some kind of impact because there's like a blowback. It looks like the JFK assassination at the back there on the right hand side of the panel. There's lots of bits and pieces flying out. It looks like a very nice, and depending on your viewpoint, there's like some kind of like, oh, what would you call it? A trap, an animal trap, but used as an accessory. So very gay. That's like on a sort of shoulder pad sort of thing. Yeah, I think that's. But I don't know entirely what I'm looking at.
Well, that's
a grill where a face should be in.
It is unfair that I've cropped in so close, but when you see the wide picture, you'll see why I've done it. Now, I know what this is from, but for the benefit of the listeners at home who can't see it, what we're looking at is something like a biker's helmet, only the guy has got a grill in the front with vertical slats instead of anything you could see through. It's got wings on the side like bat wings. There's a hole being punched through this biker's helmet by, when you look closely, you can see a fist with gloves on. The guy wearing the biker's helmet has got big shoulder pads in, which do look like they've got teeth that would form a man trap. And when you're talking about the bondage gear, and when you're talking about the leather and padding, I think we know where you're coming from. We're going to have a look now at the wider picture and see if this gives you, Scott, more information. What do you think you're looking at now?
Well, right, okay, right. It all makes perfect sense. So it is Judge Dredd fisting somebody. No.
And that goes into the trailer.
No, it does say, gaze into the fist of dread. I mean, just arrange those words. Gaze are into the fist of dread. But
It's spelled
yeah.
K. You're laughing, yeah.
So yeah, we've got
They would
Judge
be.
Dredd punching somebody right in the pus. So hard that his fists come right through the back. I don't know who the other character is. I mean, it's a gorgeous bit of art. It's very kind of. It's got that kind of communisty, Soviet kind of feel to it, hasn't it?
I'll tell you who the artist is. The artist is Brian Bolland, who has been a guest on this very podcast. Listeners, you can check us out in the season 1. Brian Bolland was a guest and see what he brought in. And yeah, the lines of that drawing, they're like a Dürer etching, aren't they? They're like a medieval lino cut or woodcut print. It's dynamic. He's got extra dynamic lines coming in from the front. That voice bubble, I can even tell you, I think, who lettered that voice bubble. I think he's lettered by a chap called Tom Frame. Back in the days when your voice bubbles were done by hand by a chap who sat in the corner of the office in Kingsreach Tower in London, where I visited them about the time as a kid. And this is from Judge Dredd in 2000 AD. Mitch, tell us more.
Like I said, I thought I could try and be niche and culty and catch us all out. But then when I saw that Brian Bolland had been a guest on this podcast, I thought, I'm going to go with what is widely considered to be the single greatest frame in comic book history. I couldn't give you the exact date. I think it was a bit later than that because I was ever so slightly late to the party 2000 AD wise. I didn't get into it until 79. It began famously at the beginning of 77. I got into 2000 AD in around the middle of 79 when I was 9 years old. The guy who got me into 2000 AD was a school friend of mine who you may have heard of, Stephen Brotherston. He's half of Scarred for Life.
Yes.
Yeah. You know those guys who do those books about paralyzingly terrifying children's TV from the 70s and 80s? That's our entire generation up for the rest of the time. Well, Steve was at Dovedale County Primary School with me in Liverpool in the 70s. Stephen, although he keeps this a bit quiet, was the most naturally gifted sketch artist I ever met. He could draw like this when we were 8. In fact, we used to do comics together when we were at primary school. I used to write them. He used to draw them. I don't know what became of any of them. But he was the one who was always ranting about 2000 AD. I don't know why it took me as long to get hold of as it was, because obviously 2000 AD is particularly at the time, so much up my alley. It was everything I was obsessed with. I love comic books. I love science fiction. The formatting of 2000 AD was brilliant because, of course, it was almost like a sci-fi TV channel in printed form.
Yeah.
The only bits that were color were the outside covers and the center spread. Everything else was black and white. And that's one of the reasons why 2000 AD ended up revolutionizing the American comic book industry. Is it wasn't just that all, because as Brian said in the episode he was on, the money you got over here was nothing, and you had to sign all your rights away. So you basically weren't making anything over here. So obviously all the best writers and artists was being sort of lured away by the sort of DC Vertigos of the world. And, that's why you have John Constantine now, and that's why you have so much of the stuff that was really good in American comics from the sort of the mid-late, and that's why you have Watchmen, those two, Alan and Dave are absolutely 2000 AD guys. Yeah. I think it did make me laugh on his podcast when who said, yeah, well, that's why you never bothered doing backgrounds.
It was Kevin and Nick that accused him of not doing backgrounds.
Yeah, I can't remember one of the other 2000 AD artists accused him of never bothering to do backgrounds. He would put so much time and effort into the figures that we just put them against, like, as you see here, is almost against a black void. But what we're seeing here is this is the second of the Dark Judges stories. Judge Death was introduced in a one-off story of his own not long after I jumped aboard. So that would have been, I think, about 1980. This, I think, is about 1981. When Judge Death, there is a power. This is when the first time you started to get metaphysics in Judge Dredd. Heretofore, it had all been fairly hard sci-fi, if you've seen either of the two movies, you get the idea of what the setup of Judge Dredd is. Post nuclear war, the only habitable bits of America left, bizarrely, are the urbanized coastal areas, which of course actually would be the first bits to get destroyed, ironically, if it actually happened. But all the survivors are now huddled into these vast cities that essentially go along the coast. So the whole of the East Coast is now Megacity 1, the whole of the West Coast is now Megacity 2, and the whole of the South is now Texas City, and these massive fortified conurbations, and the entire middle section is now the cursed earth that is this radioactive desert that nothing can survive. In due course, which is quite fun, you discover the rest of Judge Dredd's world. You get to meet the Brit judges, and also hilariously the Irish judges, who are just
Yes.
the Irish judges are just fantastic when you get to meet them. But in this, Judge Death sort of seeps through from some parallel dimension in which the judges have gone so berserk they've outlawed life. And Judge Death is literally this zombie wearing a kind of hideous mutation of Judge Dredd's own uniform, just going around sucking the life out of it. They've discovered this parallel dimension, i.e. the dimension of the comic books, where there is still life, and they've come to eradicate it from this dimension as well. And Judge Death ends up being confined inside the mind of Judge Anderson, who is the most famous psychic judges. One thing about Judge Dredd is telepathy is a thing, whether it's meant to be some kind of post-nuclear mutation telepathy but telepathy is definitely a thing. And there's an entire branch of the judges, the side judges, devoted to developing their psychic powers. And the most powerful of them was Cassandra Anderson, and she ends up in a sort of Father Karras from The Exorcist mode of sucking Judge Death into her mind, and then get confined forever in this substance called boing. This is one thing about Love of their most frivolous elements and their darkest elements would be combined in the same stories. Boing had been introduced a few episodes previously as this illegal hobby whereby you spray yourself with this stuff called boing, and it instantly inflates and turns you into like one of those gladiators' atmospheres. So you're basically you are sealed inside an enormous bouncy ball, and you can then hurl yourself off. And the only place it's legal to do this is a place called the Palais de Boing, which is essentially a football stadium-sized pinball machine that you can now hang yourself off all the surfaces of. But of course, the illegal boingers are doing it in the street and causing havoc, smashing into buildings and causing car crashes. So there was a whole episode about illegal street boinging. And then in Judge Death, Judge Anderson sort of, confines Judge Death's, essence within her mind, and then gets sealed in forever in boing. So it's meant to be this great sacrifice that she's made. But anyway, in the sequel, it turns out that Death is only one of, as Kev points out, essentially the 4 judges of the apocalypse. And his 3 pals come looking for him. They being Judge Mortis, who is decay, Judge Fire, who is fire, and we see here Judge Fear, who is fear. And the way Judge Fear gets you is you can see from his helmet, there's sort of the front grille of his helmet opens up like 2 little gates. And the way he gets you is he just grabs you and goes, gaze into the face of fear. And the gates pop open, and whatever you see in there instantly drives you out of your mind, right? That's the way Judge Fear gets you. But of course, one of the running themes of Judge Dredd is that Judge Dredd, while he is not in any respect superhuman, he has nonetheless developed superhuman levels of self-control. And there's famously an episode in which the whole of Megacity 1 gets infested with these mutant fleas that can't be killed by anything. So the whole city's just plagued by scratching fits, and Dredd is just stomping around in the middle of it all. And at one point, somebody says, "How come you ain't got the fleas, Judge?" And he says, "I've got the fleas. I'm just not scratching."
I've just listened to Mitch's description of the Palais de Boing, and that in Scotland is known as Airdrie, right? And those mutant fleas, they're known as midges, right?
The sense of humor in Judge Dredd is absolutely essential. That's why I still don't think there's been a definitive Judge Dredd movie, because, when the Carl Urban one came out, we went, oh, thank God it's not trying to be funny. And so the trouble with the Sly Stallone one wasn't that it was full of jokes, it was full of terrible jokes. So what's obviously happened here is, Judge Fear has confronted Judge Dredd. The mask has popped up and he's given it the whole gaze into the face, fear thing. And Judge Dredd has just stood there and gone, whatever, smashed it. And you'd have things like, they adapted the stainless steel rap books.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really audacious, and adapted them as one of their weekly strips. So they're just doing it like 8 pages at a time, but they did 3, I think, of the stainless steel rap books. And they were drawn by the great Carlos Esquerra, who I never met. I just missed him at the one Comic-Con I ever went to, which I think was 2014. I just missed Carlos Esquerra, the guy who designed the Judge Dredd costume. And Carlos Esquerra just had the most fascinating art style. You look at Brian's stuff here. Brian was the most photorealistic of all of them. Also, Brian's characters have the most magnificent range of facial expressions. Brian's characters overact better than everybody else's, There was another guy who did a lot of Dredd at the time called Ron Smith, who had a weird kind of 1950s look to his figures, but the most mind-bending cityscapes.
Yeah.
He loved his backgrounds. So whenever you got Ron Smith, he always got the best Megacity one. He drew the best Megacity one. And Carlos Esquerra, everything Carlos Esquerra did was dots. He painted, like one of those guys who's lost the use of his arms and paints with his mouth. That's what Carlos looked like. It was all dots. But in particular, he adapted the stainless steel rat. And I'm fairly sure, without asking him, cast James Coburn as Jim DeGritz. Who would I have if this is a movie? It'd be 1960s Flint era James Coburn. Right, we're giving him James Coburn's head.
Looking at the Judge Dredd, Brian Bolland picture that we've got here, it brings us back to one of the early observations you made, Scott, of the homoerotic nature of this leather. And there's iconography, which is unusual for these comics because they're made mostly by straight creators. You get a lot of queer creators and you get a lot of female creators now. But back then, mostly straight creators.
I can see a lot of Tom of Finland sort of in that, and that's a gay man's, eye on ridiculous overt masculinity. And I wonder if it's just men's idea of how they kind of perceive themselves or what they think an ideal is. I don't know, and that's true for gay or straight men. I don't know, that kind of big chest, broad shoulders, and fucking tight fitting uniforms. But I think there's a bit of I think there's a wee kind of fascist streak on all men. Generally the kind of the idea about what gay men fetishize is they generally end up fetishizing their fears, so which is why kind of like the sort of Ned's Charles Scally kind of look, because those were the kids that would have beaten you up at school, so that became a big thing. And like football kit and stuff like rugby kit, because those lads wouldn't have included you, and similarly so with sort of police and army uniforms, because those are places you weren't welcome. So that's as a very sort of general rule of thumb, you fetishize what you came to fear, because we know that kind of line between pleasure and pain is a very kind of sort of narrow one. So what a maybe straight man sees as this big strong authority figure, with all the power, well, like, yes, to do, but a gay man would look at that and go, oh, that's all the things I'm scared of, and I either need to assimilate and look like that, or can I subvert it and be me, but still look like that?
Like the whole sort of the way the Brighton gay scene adopted the skinhead look in the 80s.
Absolutely, yeah, totally. Yeah. That was entirely the reason that kind of happened. That it was like, we're going to subvert that.
Yeah, but one thing you do, you kind of take for granted that kind of incredible physiques in comic books. And the only time that really occurred to me was when I was at Comic-Con and you realize just how terrible superhero costumes look on normal bodies.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, God, if you've ever seen anybody fancy dressing as Asterix or Tintin, I mean, Asterix, he's got a wee dress, he's got pigtails. Tintin is ginger. I mean, it's a non-starter.
Yeah,
I never thought about Asterix, but I have occasionally thought about dressing up as Obelix.
But I'm going to end up with the wee picture that I've brought in myself.
Oh.
We don't need to devote too much time to this,
No.
but let's see what you make of the cropped-in image from this. Who would like to have the first go at describing this?
Okay. It basically looks like everything that you should absolutely not draw. Aliens that basically look like circumcised dicks with incorporated buttholes.
Yeah, I certainly, if it was attached to me, I would be consulting my GP. Which is, it looks, it looks like kind of an all-in-one hairy ballsack dick.
Yes,
arsehole situation, doesn't it?
they appear to be being fought off by some kind of future space hero because there's a hand at the edge of the frame with a very 1950s looking laser pistol trying to fend them off. The lettering at the bottom of the frame puts me in mind of Fat Freddy's cat.
Well, let's see the full page because I was zooming in on a little bit of it. Can you guess, both of you, given your day jobs, they have come across this artist. Can you guess who this might be?
Oh my God.
Well, the only one I could think of was Simon Donald off the top of my head, but
well, it's from
that doesn't look. It looks far-fetched.
From longer ago than this. This is someone
There's something very disturbingly Dr. Seuss about the alien's fingers.
There is a bit. Yeah. Well, this artist,
isn't it? Yeah.
He signed himself as Ramon, R-A-M-O-N, and the M-O-N is part of his name. He went on to become a stand-up comedian in the 1950s, working right through. I saw him perform at the Edinburgh Fringe in, would it be the late 90s, when he was emceeing the Comedy Awards. And do you want to have a guess who wrote and drew this?
Is it Bob Monkhouse?
It's Bob Monkhouse.
Really?
Bob Monkhouse defined the butthole circumcised cock alien.
This is sometime in the...
What was this in? Where did this see the light of day, if ever?
This is one of those small independent publishers that existed at the end of the 40s and the start of the 1950s. It was because there was a wave of comics. There was the stuff that was coming over from America, and we were starting to get the horror comics. I mean, you're getting the first copies of the American comics that we hadn't seen since before the war. And some British publishers cashed in on this, and this was a small independent publisher. There's only 3 or 4 issues of this Oh Boy comic, and Bob, under the name Ramon, wrote and drew the Tornado character, who appears on the front cover and appears a few times.
Oh my word.
Bottom right, he appears to have sort of drawn himself. You know, that looks very like game show Bob, doesn't it?
It does look like the Bob he would become.
Did nobody flag up what those aliens look like? Was we genuinely that innocent in the film that nobody noticed that Tornado is fighting a horde of cocks?
They were clearly innocent times.
Nobody wanted to bring it up.
I mean, I wouldn't like to, I've got no qualifications in psychology or psychotherapy or anything like that, but I would, I'd be intrigued to see what a professional would say about that, what Bob's attitude to his own genitalia was.
Well, I'm very pleased to have had 2 professional comedians passing comment on the work of a third. Thank you so much for joining me on my little old podcast.
This has been lovely fun.
You got to tell us where we can look out for you in 2026, Scott.
I don't know what we're doing. I have my own podcast along with my friend who also suffers from heart failure. That's called Heart of the Matter and Other Failures. So it's like people that once you've had a kind of heart issue and people expect you to be wearing lycra and climbing mountains, and we've kind of not done it that way, that rehab thing, so it's a bit you don't have to suddenly become some kind of muscle bound Mary and outdoors freak. It's about kind of making small changes and things like that. So we do that. You get that wherever you get podcasts. Heart of the Matter and Other Failures. Scott Agnew and Nathan Sparling. I'm on Instagram. I'm Agnew Scott on Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky, as good as someone knows what that is, and just search for me on Facebook. That's my main one, Facebook, really.
We'll find you.
Thank you.
Mitch, what are you up to?
Well, I too have a podcast because it is, after all, as I heard somebody describe it recently, the ugly white guys only fans. It's called We Know a Song About That, Don't We? Because I've been writing comic and topical songs for 30 years now, and history has a way of repeating itself. So the format is to talk about what's in the news this week, and then I'll play you the song I wrote the last time this happened. A way of getting some mileage out of the back catalogue, as I'm sure you understand. Live-wise, I'm about to revive an old show of mine, Mitch Benn is the 37th Beatle, about growing up in the shadow of the Beatles and having all kinds of weird little connections to them. And then starting in April, I'm going to be touring last year's Edinburgh show, which, depending on your level of cynicism, is either the worst or best timed show in Fringes. A show about the great American comic songwriter Tom Lehrer, who is my personal hero and inspiration as a comic songwriter, who very obligingly dropped dead 3 days before we opened. Which, you've got a bit of a calculated risk putting a show together about a guy who was 97. But I've got to say, at the risk of being ruthless, it didn't do us any harm.
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
It really did. People are asking me, have you got the same PR agency as the movie Conclave? But
just remember not to get into a copyright dispute with Mitch Benn. You know what happens.
Well, listener, if you fancy going to the Tom Lehrer show, we'll all go together when we go. On which cheesy note, I think it's time to round up. Thanks to Scott Agnew, thanks to Mitch Benn, and thanks to you for listening.
This has been so much fun, and genuinely really good fun. And for somebody who was a complete kind of comic book rookie and knew nothing, I was expecting it to be really awkward, and it wasn't at all. So thank you very much, Kev. Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you, Scott. And Borag Thung, Kev.
Zarjaz. Hey, if you're enjoying this episode of Comic Cuts, the panel show, don't forget there's an entire back catalogue and a first season for you to catch up on. My guests have included comic folk like Brian Bolland, Rachel Smith, Metafrog, Gary Northfield, Nigel Octoluni, Nigel Parkinson, Laura Howell, Sonia Long, David Leitch. We've had the comics laureate Hannah Berry, resident alien creator Peter Hogan, podcasters like Adam Roach, legendary singer-songwriter Dean Friedman, Jessica Martin. The list of comedians includes Ashley Storey, Bethany Black, Will Hodgson, Paul Carenza, Izzy Lawrence, Doug Siegel. There is too many to list. And they've brought in comics from Marvel and DC to the Bunty and the Eagle, from Robert Crumb to Viz, webcomics, obscure manga, all points in between. And sometimes we don't talk about comics at all. Don't forget to click and subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. For example, what could these two be talking about?
Man with a swastika on his shirt. He's got his trousers down, his bum out, and he's standing with his feet in a bucket of pig shit on a stage. There's lots of people looking behind him, and he's saying, oh yes, I can feel it coming out now. Go on, fuck off out of it, you blasted queen.
And don't forget, the Queen is visible. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II is visible in the top left-hand corner. As the curtains part, the Queen is in the royal box. So this is a royal variety performance for the panelologists at home that study line.